The first thing my daughter said when she walked into my kitchen was, "Well, this is dramatic." She said it with a little laugh. Not a warm laugh, not the kind that softens a room, the kind people use when they want everyone else to know they are not the problem. I was standing at the stove with my hands still wrapped around the spoon. The green beans had gone cold 20 minutes earlier, and the gravy had formed that thin skin across the top that happens when people stop paying attention to the meal and start paying attention to each other. My dining table was full. My brother Neil sat near the end with his elbows close to his sides, like he wished he were smaller than he was. His wife, Donna, kept folding and unfolding her napkin. My granddaughter Ava was there too, almost 19 now, staring down at her plate so hard you would think the mashed potatoes had said something offensive to her. And at the far side of the table, in my late husband's chair, sat my daughter Lisa. She had not even taken her coat off before choosing that seat. That was what I noticed first. Not the suitcase by the door, not the tan on her face, not the brightness in her voice that still carried a little seaside wind in it. My husband's chair. She had pulled it out and sat down there as if she belonged in the center of my kitchen, as if the room had been waiting for her to come back and take over the conversation. And beside her plate was a folder, cream-colored, neat, already opened. I had set the table for dinner at 4 o'clock. By 5:30, everyone had arrived. By 6, Lisa still had not come home from her trip, and Ava had started helping me carry things from the kitchen without even asking. By 6:15, Neil had cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should wait, in my own house." For the person who had used my pension check to spend 4 days at the coast with her friend Sherry while telling me she just needed a little break. A break! That was the word she had used. Not theft, not betrayal, not humiliation, just a break. Then at 6:30 the front door opened, and in she came sun-kissed and smiling, with a straw tote bag over one shoulder and a scarf tied around her hair like she was walking back from a postcard instead of into the wreckage she had made. She set her sunglasses on my counter. My counter. Then she looked around at the full table and said, "Oh, good, everybody's here," like she had planned it that way, like this was her dinner, like I was the one who had been invited. Nobody answered right away. That silence told me more than any words could have. Because it was not surprise, it was not confusion, it was the silence of people who had already had part of the conversation without me. Lisa slid into that chair at the head of the table and touched the folder with 2 fingers. Just touched it. Lightly, possessively. Then she looked at me and gave me a tired little smile, the kind daughters give mothers when they are trying to look patient in front of other people. "Mom," she said, "please don't make this harder than it has to be." For a second, I truly thought I had misheard her. I was still holding the spoon, still standing, still wearing the apron I had ironed that morning. And my daughter, who had taken my money and vanished to the seaside, had walked back into my house and spoken to me like I was the difficult one. I put the spoon down very carefully. "What," I said, "exactly am I making hard?" Ava looked up then, quickly, then back down again. Donna shifted in her chair. Neil reached for his water glass and missed it the first time. Lisa sighed, not deeply, just enough to let the table hear it. "We talked about this before I left." "No," I said, "you talked. I listened to you tell me you were borrowing from me. It wasn't borrowing, Mom. It was family helping family." I actually smiled then, though there was no humor in it. That sentence had been prepared. I knew it the way women know when a pie crust was not made from scratch. You can just tell. My eyes went to the folder. Lisa noticed, so she placed her palm over it, not fully, just enough. Another small gesture that told me more than she meant to reveal. "Why is there a folder on my dinner table?" I asked. "It's just information," she said quickly. "Information for what?" She glanced at Neil, then Donna, then back at me. That was when I knew for sure. This wasn't something she had brought home from the trip. This had been waiting here for her return, or worse, for my reaction. "Mom," she said, and now her voice had that careful softness in it people use around the elderly when they want everyone else to believe they're being kind. "You've been under a lot of strain lately." I felt every person at the table become very still. That sentence did not belong to a daughter talking off the cuff. That sentence had been practiced. I leaned one hand against the back of my chair, my actual chair, 3 places down from the head of the table, where Ava had quietly set my plate as if some decision had already been made about where I should sit now. That was the second thing I noticed. My seat had been moved. Not removed, just shifted. As if the center of the room had gently, naturally drifted away from me while I was busy boiling potatoes. "You've been under strain," Lisa repeated. "And everybody's worried. We're just trying to keep things manageable." Manageable. Another prepared word. I looked at Neil. "Are you worried?" He swallowed. "We just think maybe things need a little structure." "And Donna?" Donna gave me a look so full of apology it almost embarrassed me for her. "It's only because everyone cares," she said. Everyone. Such a dangerous word. It covers a multitude of sins. I took off my apron then and folded it over the back of my chair. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Inside, though, something had begun to pull tight across my chest. Not panic, recognition. That was worse. Because panic is loud. Recognition is quiet. Recognition is when you understand that a thing has already been built around you, beam by beam, room by room, while you were still living inside the old version of your life. Lisa opened the folder. Not all the way, just enough for the first page to show. There was my name near the top, my full legal name. And beneath it, words I could not fully read from where I stood. I saw monthly benefits. I saw household expenses. I saw temporary oversight. My mouth went dry. "What is that?" I asked. Lisa didn't answer immediately. She straightened the paper instead, as if neatness might make it more acceptable. "Mom," she said, "after what happened with the pension, we needed to come up with a better system." I stared at her. After what happened with the pension? As if the pension had wandered off by itself, as if she had not drained it for hotel nights and seafood lunches and souvenir pictures by the water, as if she had not called me from a boardwalk 2 days earlier and said, laughing, "Don't worry, I'll sort you out when I get back." The room had gone so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. I could hear someone's fork touch a plate. I could hear my own blood in my ears. And then Lisa said the sentence that made the entire evening turn sharp inside me. "We've already started putting something in place." Started. Not discussed, not considered. Started. I looked down the table at the faces of my family, people avoiding my eyes, people pretending concern, people sitting in seats that suddenly felt assigned rather than chosen. That was when I understood the true shape of the night. This dinner was not here to ask me anything. This dinner was here to show me what they had already decided. For a few seconds, no one moved. The room held that strange, fragile quiet that only happens when something has been said that cannot easily be taken back. Lisa kept her hand resting on the folder, not gripping it, just touching it like someone protecting a piece of furniture that had always belonged to them. I looked around the table again, at Ava's bent head, at Neil's careful silence, at Donna's folded napkin, and the thought slid into my mind slowly like a drawer opening by itself. They've talked about this already, not tonight, before tonight. I pulled out my chair and sat down. No one offered to help. No one asked if I was all right. They were all watching me the way people watch someone about to say something inconvenient. Well, I said calmly, since we're apparently organized enough for paperwork, perhaps someone would like to explain it. Lisa exhaled softly, like she had been waiting for me to say exactly that. It's not a big deal, Mom. Whenever someone says that, you can be certain it is. We just met with a financial advisor last week. The word landed heavily in the middle of the table. I had been home last week, cooking, paying the gas bill, watering the hydrangeas by the porch, living my life. And somehow during those same days, my daughter had been sitting in an office somewhere discussing my finances. Without me. With who? I asked. A gentleman named Mark Jensen, she said. He helps families organize retirement income. Families, such a useful word again, a word that can erase a single person's voice if you say it confidently enough. And you invited him to talk about my pension? Well, technically it was my appointment, Lisa said. But we talked about the household situation. My kitchen, my refrigerator humming behind me, the chair my husband used to sit in, my household. Neil cleared his throat. Lisa thought it would be good to look at everything together, he said. I turned toward him slowly. Did you attend this meeting too, Neil? He hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Donna shifted in her chair. I was there for part of it, she admitted quietly. The realization moved through me like cold water. 3 of them, in a room, talking about my life, my money, my home. And no one had thought to call me. Was Ava there too? I asked. Ava looked up immediately, startled. No, Grandma, I swear I wasn't. I know you weren't, I said gently. Then I turned back to Lisa. What exactly did you tell this, Mr. Jensen? Lisa leaned back in the chair, my husband's chair, and folded her hands together. We explained that things have been a little unstable lately. Unstable, another word chosen carefully. Unstable, I repeated. You've been stressed, Mom. The bills, the house maintenance, the pension payments. It's a lot for one person. One person, I said. Lisa gestured around the table. Well, for someone managing everything, something in that sentence was off. Not just the tone, the timing. I looked again at the folder. The first page was angled just enough for me to see a date in the top corner. March 4th. Today was March 11th. 7 days. 7 days since they had sat in an office with a man named Mark Jensen and discussed my pension. 7 days of silence. 7 days of dinners and phone calls and ordinary life where no one had mentioned it. That date settled into my mind like a pin on a map. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady again. Did this Mr. Jensen recommend that my daughter take my pension to the beach? I asked. Lisa's mouth tightened. That was different. How? It was temporary. You told me you were borrowing it. I was. You didn't ask. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried another direction. That's exactly why we needed to talk to someone, she said, because money decisions have been emotional lately. Emotional. The word slid across the table like a little knife. I looked at Donna. Did I seem emotional when Lisa asked for the money? Donna hesitated. Well, you did say you weren't sure. Of course I wasn't sure, I said quietly. It was my pension. Neil rubbed his forehead. Look, nobody's accusing anyone of anything, he said. We just want to prevent misunderstandings. Prevent misunderstandings. Another prepared phrase. And suddenly the pattern began appearing everywhere. prepared sentences, prepared concerns, prepared explanations. I turned my attention back to Lisa, and after this helpful meeting, I said, "You all decided to bring paperwork to my dinner table." "It's not paperwork like that," she said quickly. "Then what kind is it?" She opened the folder another inch. "Just a temporary arrangement," she said. Temporary. The word sounded friendly, harmless, like a folding chair someone might borrow for a picnic. But the page beneath her hand looked very official. I could see small blocks of typed text. I could see lines for signatures. I could see something labeled authorized oversight. I felt a quiet pressure behind my ribs, not panic, not anger, something slower, something thinking. "Who suggested this arrangement?" I asked. "The advisor," Lisa said. "And the meeting was last week." "Yes, and the paperwork was prepared when?" She hesitated, just long enough. Yesterday. Which meant that sometime between yesterday afternoon and tonight's dinner, someone had taken the time to print those documents. Someone had brought them here. Someone had decided this table, my table, was the appropriate place to introduce them. "Did the advisor tell you to bring them tonight?" I asked. "No," Lisa admitted. "So that was your idea. We just thought it would be easier with everyone present." Everyone, again. The room had begun to feel smaller, not physically, emotionally, like walls were quietly sliding inward. I noticed something else then. Something tiny. The folder had a second page underneath the first, and the top of that page showed another date, February 18th. That was not last week. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before the beach trip, before the borrowed pension, before any conversation Lisa had bothered to have with me. My eyes stayed on that corner of paper. "Lisa," I said softly. "Yes? When did you first speak to this advisor?" She hesitated again. Neil shifted in his chair. Donna looked down. Lisa finally said, "About 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. There it was. The timeline widening, the quiet shape of a plan forming long before the seaside photos and cheerful phone calls. "You scheduled the meeting before you took the pension," I said. "It wasn't like that, wasn't it?" "It was just research. I nodded slowly. Research that somehow ended with documents sitting on my dinner table. Research that had involved 3 members of my family and 1 professional stranger. Research that had somehow moved my seat 3 places down from the head of my own table, and in that moment something inside me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a small internal movement like a lock turning 1 click. Because I understood something important. This dinner had not been arranged to solve the pension problem. The pension problem had been useful. It had given them a reason, an excuse, a story they could tell each other about why tonight was necessary. But the real conversation had started weeks earlier, in an office, with a man named Mark Jensen, without me. And the folder on my table was not the beginning of the plan. It was the moment they expected me to accept it. I kept my eyes on that second date, February 18th. It sat there in the corner of the page like a quiet witness. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of conversations I had not been part of. 3 weeks of meetings where my life had been discussed as if I were a topic instead of a person. Lisa noticed where I was looking. She slid the paper slightly deeper into the folder, not quickly, but deliberately, a small movement that told me she had not meant for me to see it yet. "Mom," she said, softer now, "this isn't a confrontation." That word caught in the air. Confrontation. As if I had arrived at the table looking for a fight. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands together in my lap. "I haven't raised my voice," I said calmly. "No, but you're reacting." Reacting, another useful word. It puts responsibility on the person responding instead of the person acting. Neil nodded slowly, as if that made sense. We just want to get ahead of things, he said. Get ahead of what? Future problems, future problems. I looked around the table again. Everyone had that careful expression people wear when they believe they are being reasonable. Reasonable people. Calm voices. Concerned faces. If someone had walked past the window, they might have thought this was a loving family conversation. They would not have seen the chair that had been taken, or the seat that had been reassigned, or the folder that had arrived before I even knew a meeting had happened. Lisa tapped the paper once with her finger. This arrangement just helps keep things organized. You mean controlled? No, Mom. Yes, I said quietly. That's exactly what you mean, she sighed again. Not dramatically, just enough to signal patience. We told you things were getting complicated. When? At Christmas. I blinked. At Christmas, she repeated. You mentioned the roof repair and the gas bill, I said slowly. Yes, and we talked about how stressful that was for you. I remember talking about the roof leaking, I said. We discussed the bigger picture. No, I said gently, you did. For the first time, Lisa's voice sharpened a little. You agreed something needed to change. I agreed the roof needed fixing. You said you were tired of the roof leaking. You said it was too much. I said climbing the ladder to check the gutter was too much. Ava's fork slipped from her hand and clattered softly against the plate. No one spoke for a moment. Lisa leaned forward. You're focusing on details. Yes, I said, because details matter. That's not what we meant, but it is what you said. The room felt tight now, not loud, not explosive, just stretched, like a string pulled too far between two fingers. Neil shifted again. Maybe we're remembering the conversation differently, he said carefully. Differently, another soft word. A polite way to say someone is wrong without calling them a liar. Lisa nodded quickly. That's what I mean, Mom. Sometimes things get said and later you remember them another way. There it was. The sentence I had been waiting for. The one that always arrives when someone wants to move authority away from the person sitting at the table. You just don't remember. She didn't say it exactly like that. But the shape of the sentence was the same. You might not recall all of it, she said. I felt something settle in my chest then, not anger. Recognition again. I had seen this before. In hospital waiting rooms. In quiet conversations with social workers. In stories my church friends whispered about siblings who had suddenly begun helping their parents with paperwork. First there is concern. Then there is organization. Then there is doubt. Not about the documents, about the person. Lisa kept speaking. The advisor said it's common for families to do this early, she said, before things get confusing. Confusing for who? For everyone. Neil nodded again. It protects you, too. Protects me. That was a clever addition. Protection always sounds noble, but protection can also mean control. I leaned forward slightly and rested my elbows on the table. The folder sat just 2 feet away from me now, close enough to read if she let go of it. What exactly does this arrangement do? I asked. Lisa hesitated. It just lets me help manage certain expenses. Help, I repeated. Yes. With my pension, well, technically with the account connected to the pension, the language had changed again. From pension to account, from borrowing to managing, from discussion to arrangement. Words can move a story very far without anyone noticing. Is my name still on that account? I asked. Of course it is, but there's just an additional authorization, additional, another gentle word, one that hides the direction of power. I glanced again at the top of the page. The typed section I could see included a line labeled, "Primary Financial Oversight, Primary, not help, not assistance, primary." "Who drafted this document?" I asked. "The advisor helped prepare it." "Did a lawyer review it?" "Yes." "And when was that?" Lisa's fingers tightened on the folder edge. "Monday. Today was Thursday. 4 days. 4 days since a lawyer had reviewed paperwork about my finances. 4 days since my daughter had held documents that described my pension in terms of oversight. 4 days where she had not mentioned a single word to me. I nodded slowly. "And the lawyer was comfortable drafting something like this without meeting me?" "It's only temporary." "That wasn't my question." Lisa hesitated. "Well, technically it doesn't require your presence to prepare the draft." Prepare the draft. Another step revealed, another piece of the timeline quietly sliding into place. February 18th, advisor meeting. Last week, follow-up conversation. Monday, lawyer review. And tonight, dinner. Dinner where my seat had been moved. Dinner where my daughter sat in the center. Dinner where a folder waited for me like an assignment. "You said this was temporary," I said. "Yes." "How long?" "Just until things stabilize." Stabilize. The same word she had used earlier. The same word people use when they want to suggest something is unstable, without ever proving it. "And how would we know when things were stable again?" I asked. "Well, we'd review the situation. Lisa paused, then said quietly, "The family," which apparently meant everyone at the table except the woman whose pension had started the conversation. Ava looked up again then. Her voice was small. "Grandma always pays the bills on time." The sentence landed in the room like a dropped glass. Lisa turned toward her. "Ava, this isn't about that. Then what is it about?" Neil cleared his throat sharply. "Ava, sweetheart." "No," she said softly. "I just want to understand." So did I. I looked back at the folder. There was another line visible now, not the signature line, but the witness section. 2 names. I could not read them fully from where I sat, but the shape of one name was familiar. Donna. My eyes lifted slowly. Donna noticed immediately. Her face went pale. "Donna," I said quietly, "did you sign that document?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded once. "Yes." The room felt very still. "When?" I asked. "Yesterday afternoon." "Where?" "At the advisor's office, yesterday afternoon, while I was in my garden pulling dead leaves from the rose bushes, while I was planning this dinner, while I was expecting my daughter to come home and apologize for taking my pension. Instead, they had been witnessing documents, preparing arrangements, signing papers that described my finances without me in the room." I looked at Lisa again. "You told me the meeting was last week." "It was." "You didn't mention the lawyer on Monday. I didn't think it mattered yet." "You didn't mention Donna signing yesterday." "It was just a formality. A witness, a lawyer, an advisor, 3 weeks of quiet preparation, and tonight my dinner table." I folded my hands again. The tight feeling in my chest had changed now. Not fear, not even hurt. Something cooler, something clearer. Because I finally understood the real story they had been building around me. Not that I had done anything wrong, not that my pension had been stolen, not that a daughter had taken advantage of trust, no. Their story was simpler than that. Their story was that I had agreed. And somewhere in the paperwork on my table, they were counting on my signature to make that story official. For a while, no one said anything. The plates were still half full. The gravy had gone cold completely now. Somewhere behind me, the refrigerator motor clicked off and left the kitchen quieter than it should have been for a house full of people. I looked at the table. at the forks, at the folded napkins, at the chair my daughter was sitting in. My husband had bought that chair 31 years ago. We had driven all the way to Lancaster to pick out that table set. I remember the smell of the wood shop and the way he ran his hand across the grain like he was testing something important. Solid, he said that day, not just the table. The life, that was the word he used. Solid. We carried those chairs into this house together. I was 40 then, and the kitchen still had wallpaper with little blue flowers on it that I hated, but hadn't had the energy to replace yet. Lisa was 10 years old. She had dragged one of the chairs across the floor that afternoon and climbed up to the table so she could help me roll cookie dough. She kept pressing her thumb too hard into the cutter shapes and ruining the edges. I remember laughing. Gentle, I told her. She looked up at me with flour on her nose and said, "I'm helping." Helping. The word felt strange now, because tonight she had used that same word. Helping, but it did not feel the same. I looked at her sitting in that chair, one hand still resting protectively over the folder. My daughter, the same little girl who used to stand on that chair so she could reach the counter. The same girl who cried when the training wheels came off her bike because she thought falling meant she had failed. The same girl I had stayed up with all night when she had pneumonia at 6 years old, sitting in the rocking chair by her bed counting her breaths. That girl had once told me, very seriously, "You're the boss of our house." I had laughed then. But she believed it. Children believe those things. They believe their mothers are permanent, that the person paying the bills and cooking dinner and fixing the leaky sink will always be there. For years that belief had been true. When my husband died 12 years ago, the kitchen became quieter for a while. The chair at the head of the table stayed empty for months. Lisa had come over a lot then. She brought casseroles. She checked the mailbox. She helped me call the insurance company. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the funeral, I remember standing right where I had been earlier tonight by the stove, while Lisa sat at the table with a stack of envelopes. "You shouldn't have to handle all this alone," she said, and I told her something I had always believed. "This house stays the same," I said. "As long as I'm here, nothing about this house changes." She nodded back then. She said, "Of course." I remember that moment very clearly now, because tonight I could see how easily words drift away over time. Lisa tapped the folder lightly. "Mom," she said again, her voice softer now, "this isn't about taking anything away from you." I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about another memory, 5 years ago. Lisa had called me late on a Tuesday night, her voice shaky. She had lost her job at the dental office, and the rent on her apartment was due the next week. I didn't hesitate. "Come stay here," I told her. She moved back into the guest room for 6 months. 6 months of shared groceries, shared mornings, shared laundry baskets sitting on the hallway floor. When she found a new job, she cried in the kitchen. "I'll pay you back," she said. I told her something else I believed. "You don't owe your mother rent," I said. I meant it. Families help each other. That had always been the rule in this house. But tonight the rule felt different. Tonight the help was coming with paperwork and witnesses and language that made my life sound like a project someone else had been assigned to manage. I finally looked back at Lisa. "You said I was under strain," I said quietly. "You are," she answered quickly. "I cook every day, yes. I pay the bills, yes. I maintain the house, well, mostly. A small correction, just enough to create doubt. I remember the roof repair, I said. That was a lot for you. I called the contractor myself. Yes, but I wrote the check. Lisa sighed again. It's not about whether you can do those things. Then what is it about? She hesitated. For the first time all evening, her confidence wavered slightly. It's about making sure everything stays secure. Secure. That word felt different from the others. Not emotional, not organizational. Secure. The kind of word banks use, the kind of word lawyers write into documents. I looked down at the folder again, at the typed lines I could barely see, at the witness signatures, at the corner of the second page with that date from 3 weeks ago. My kitchen, my table, my pension, my daughter's hand resting on paperwork about all three, and suddenly I understood something that hurt more than the money, more than the trip, more than the witnesses and the quiet meetings in offices where I had never been invited. The plan had not begun when she took the pension. The plan had begun when she stopped seeing me as the person who ran this house. Somewhere between that 10-year-old girl pressing cookie cutters too hard and the woman sitting in my husband's chair tonight, the story in her mind had changed. In her story, I had become the person who needed managing, who needed structure, who might not remember conversations correctly. And if that story became official, if it lived on paper instead of just in quiet conversations, then everything about my life could shift with a few signatures. I folded my hands on the table again. The kitchen smelled faintly of gravy and roasted carrots. Ava was watching me carefully now. Not scared, just alert, like she understood something important was happening. Lisa, I said calmly, before we talk about signing anything. She straightened slightly. I want to know exactly what that document says about me. Her fingers tightened on the folder again, just a little, and for the first time that evening I saw something in her eyes I had not seen before. Not patience, not concern, calculation, because whatever was written inside that folder, whatever arrangement they had already begun putting in place, she knew that once I read it, this dinner was going to become something very different. Lisa didn't answer me right away. Her fingers stayed on the folder, pressing the corner of the page flat as if the paper might curl up and betray her. Around the table no one moved. The silence had changed again. Before it had been cautious. Now it felt heavier, like everyone was waiting for the moment that could not be undone. Mom, Lisa said finally, it's just a standard family arrangement. I held out my hand. Let me see it, she hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any sentence could. Neil shifted in his chair. Maybe we should just explain it first, he said. I prefer reading things myself. Lisa looked at Donna. Donna looked at the table. Then Lisa slowly slid the folder across the wood toward me. Not quickly, not angrily, just carefully, like someone handing over something fragile. I opened it. The paper felt heavier than ordinary printer paper. Legal paper usually does. There were 2 pages clipped together. The first line read, Household Financial Oversight Agreement. I kept reading. My name appeared in the second paragraph. So did Lisa's. And then I saw the sentence that mattered. It sat in the middle of the page in calm, perfectly typed language. Lisa spoke before I finished reading it. We've already allocated the pension funds. For a moment, I didn't say anything. The room went quiet in a strange way. Not empty, just muffled. I could hear the refrigerator humming again behind me. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly down the street. I felt the chair beneath me. Solid, the wood grain against the back of my hand. Allocated, I repeated in my head, allocated, as if my pension were a box of office supplies someone had sorted into drawers. Across the table, Lisa was watching me very carefully, waiting. The word circled inside my mind again. Allocated. In that pause, I understood something worse than the money. They weren't asking me what to do with my pension. They had already done it. I lifted my eyes from the paper. What exactly does allocated mean? I asked quietly. Lisa sat up straighter. It means the funds are already scheduled. Scheduled for what? For household management. I looked down again. Halfway down the page was a small chart, 3 columns: monthly benefits, household account, managed distribution. The numbers were neat, precise. My pension payment was listed in the first column. In the second column, there was an account number I recognized, Lisa's checking account. And in the third column, there were amounts broken into categories: utilities, groceries, property tax reserve, maintenance, allowance. I blinked. Lisa, I said slowly, why does this document say I receive an allowance? She shifted slightly. It's just a budgeting structure. For whom? For the household. This is my household. It's our household now, Mom. That sentence sat on the table between us like a dropped glass. Neil cleared his throat. Lisa just means she's helping manage things. I tapped the page gently with my finger. This says the pension is transferred automatically, yes, to your account, to manage the bills, and then I receive an allowance. It's just for spending money. I looked up at her. My pension is my spending money. Lisa's voice sharpened slightly. Not when the house expenses come first. The house expenses have always come first, yes, but now they're organized. Another word from the earlier conversation, only now it had numbers attached. I turned the page. The second sheet held the signatures. Lisa's name, Donna's name as witness, a lawyer's printed letterhead at the bottom, and a blank line, for me. I sat there for a moment, just looking at that empty space, a space waiting patiently for my handwriting, a space they had clearly expected to fill tonight. When did the pension transfer start? I asked. Lisa answered quickly. This month. This month? Yes. I flipped back to the chart. The first scheduled transfer date was listed at the top, March 1st, 10 days ago. You said this was an arrangement, I said quietly. It is. No, I said, tapping the page again. This says the transfer has already started. Lisa nodded. We set up the account connection last week, while I had been cooking dinner, while she had been at the seaside, while the family had been quietly organizing my pension. I felt something strange then. Not anger, not even shock, just a cold, precise understanding. Let me see if I understand correctly, I said calmly. Lisa leaned forward slightly. Yes, you met with an advisor 3 weeks ago. Yes, you met with a lawyer on Monday. Yes, you witnessed the paperwork yesterday. Donna looked down again. Yes, and my pension was already redirected on March 1st. Lisa nodded once. Yes, the room fell quiet again. But this time the quiet was sharper. Because the story was finally clear. The beach trip, the borrowed money, the dinner tonight, those things were only the surface. The real plan had started earlier. It had moved through offices and meetings and documents, while I was watering roses and planning dinners and believing my daughter would come home and apologize. They had built the system already. They had connected the account. They had scheduled the transfers. And tonight was simply the moment they expected me to agree with what was already happening. Lisa spoke carefully. We just need your signature, so everything is official. Official. I looked at the blank line again, my name typed neatly beneath it, waiting. The room seemed to lean toward that space. Neil. Donna. even Ava, though she was trying not to stare. Everyone watching, everyone waiting to see whether I would sign the story they had written for me. I closed the folder gently. The sound of the paper settling against the table felt louder than it should have. Then I placed my hand flat on top of it. For the first time that evening, Lisa looked uncertain, because the plan she had described depended on one quiet assumption, that I would see the paperwork, feel embarrassed, feel overwhelmed, and sign it quickly so the evening could move on. But sitting there with my hand on the folder, I understood something else entirely. The system might already be built. The transfer might already be scheduled. But the one thing they were still counting on was my silence. I did not sign the paper that night. I closed the folder, slid it gently back across the table, and said only one thing. I need time to read this properly. Lisa tried to keep her voice calm. Mom, it's really just a formality. Then it will still be a formality tomorrow, I replied. No one argued after that. Dinner ended quietly. Plates were cleared, chairs pushed back. People left the house in that careful way families do when they know something serious has begun, but no one is ready to name it yet. Lisa stayed the night. She had been staying in the guest room since moving back after losing her job. Normally, she talked late into the evening, moving around the kitchen, opening cupboards, asking small questions. That night, she said very little, and I said even less. But I did something she did not expect. The next morning, after she left for work, I took the folder and drove downtown. Not to Mark Jensen, not to the lawyer whose letterhead sat on the bottom of that paper. I drove to the credit union, where my pension had been deposited for the last 12 years. The young woman at the desk recognized me immediately. Mrs. Callahan, she said warmly, how are you today? I need to review a transfer that started this month. She looked at the screen for a moment. Then her expression shifted slightly. Oh, she said. Yes, that account connection. What account connection? The automatic distribution. I slid the folder across the counter. She read the page carefully. Then she looked back at me. Did you authorize this? No. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. Well, she said slowly, the connection was initiated through a joint authorization request. Joint. That means 2 people had to approve it. Yes. And whose names are on that authorization? She turned the screen slightly so I could see my name and Lisa's, except beside my name there was a small note, pending signature confirmation. My stomach tightened. So the transfer is active, I said. Yes, but the authorization is incomplete. She nodded. Technically, yes, meaning the account link was set up, but without the final signature, the bank can suspend the distribution. The bank had processed the connection, but without my final signature, the distribution could still be reversed. Suspend. The word felt like cool air in a closed room. I nodded slowly. I would like to suspend it. She clicked a few keys. Done, she said gently. I sat there for a moment. The whole system my daughter had carefully arranged, the advisor, the lawyer, the witness, the dinner table reveal, had been waiting for one final step. My signature. Without it, the machine could pause. I drove home very quietly after that. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me like a small animal that had stopped moving. That afternoon, I made 2 more phone calls. One to a lawyer recommended by a friend from church, another to Mark Jensen's office, not to accuse anyone, just to ask questions, simple questions. When was the meeting scheduled? Who requested the paperwork? What information had been provided about me? The answers came calmly, professionally, and with dates that stretched the story even further back. February 15th. Lisa had called the advisor's office 3 days before the meeting. She had described me as struggling with financial management. I wrote that sentence down. Not because it hurt, because it mattered. By the time Lisa came home that evening, I had a neat stack of notes sitting on the kitchen table. Dates, meetings, transfers, phone calls, the timeline of a plan. And on Saturday afternoon, I invited everyone back for dinner. Lisa assumed I was ready to sign. You thought about it? She asked hopefully. Yes, I said. Neil and Donna arrived again. Ava came too. The table looked almost exactly the same as it had 3 nights earlier. Same chairs, same dishes, same quiet tension humming beneath the surface. Lisa sat in the same seat at the head of the table, my husband's chair. The folder sat in front of her again, but this time I brought something of my own, a thin envelope. When everyone was seated, Lisa opened the folder and pushed the paper toward me. So we can finalize this, she said. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I slid my envelope across the table. Gently, right beside her folder, she frowned slightly. What's that? Just a few dates, I said. Neil looked uncomfortable immediately. Donna stared at the envelope like it might explode. Lisa opened it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, simple, plain, each one printed with the timeline I had written. February 15th, call to advisor. February 18th, family meeting. March 1st, pension transfer initiated. March 7th, lawyer review. March 10th, witness signature. March 11th, dinner presentation. Lisa read the first page, then the second, then the third. Her face changed slowly. Not dramatically, just the way people's faces change when a story they believed was neat and tidy suddenly becomes messy. Neil leaned forward. Where did you get those? From the people who were in the meetings. No one spoke. The refrigerator hummed again. The clock above the stove ticked twice. Lisa finally looked up at me. You went behind my back. No, I said calmly. I walked into the same rooms you walked into. She opened her mouth, closed it. I slid one more paper across the table, a single page from the credit union. At the bottom was a short note. Automatic pension distribution suspended pending signature authorization. Lisa read the line, then looked up again, and in that moment the entire story froze, like a photograph. Her sitting in my husband's chair, the folder open in front of her, my timeline spread across the table, and the quiet realization moving across everyone's faces. They could no longer pretend I didn't understand. No one reached for the food that night. The dishes were there, roasted chicken, potatoes, the same green beans I had made a few nights earlier, but the table had turned into something else entirely. Paper had replaced dinner. Lisa was still holding the credit union notice. Her eyes moved across the line again. Automatic pension distribution, suspended pending signature authorization. Then she looked up at me. You froze it, yes. Her voice tightened. You didn't even talk to me first. I believe we've established that conversations were not the method you preferred. Neil shifted in his chair. Let's not turn this into... No, I said gently. I'm not turning anything into anything. I placed my hands flat on the table. Lisa already started something. I'm just finishing the conversation. Lisa closed the folder slowly. The confidence she had walked into the room with 3 days earlier was no longer sitting comfortably on her shoulders. You embarrassed me at the bank, she said. I asked questions. You made it sound like I was stealing. You told them I was struggling with financial management. That landed harder than anything else. Lisa's eyes flickered. You weren't supposed to see that, but I did. The room felt very still again. Ava was watching both of us now, not like a child watching adults argue, but like someone observing a lesson that might matter later. Lisa pushed her chair back slightly. So what happens now? She asked. Her voice had changed, less confident. more defensive. I slid the folder back toward her. "What happens now," I said calmly, "is that this document stays unsigned. You're refusing?" "I'm declining. That's the same thing." "No," I said quietly. "It's not. Refusal sounds emotional. Declining is simply a decision." Neil leaned forward. "Maybe there's a compromise here." "There already was," I said. "For 12 years, Lisa shook her head. "You're ignoring the point." "And what exactly is the point?" "That things change, yes," I said softly. "They do." She gestured around the room. "You're older now. The house is bigger than you need. The finances are complicated. I pay the bills. But what about 10 years from now?" 10 years from now, we can have a conversation. That's what we're trying to do." "No," I said. "You had the conversation 3 weeks ago." Lisa's jaw tightened. "We were trying to protect you." There it was again, the word that made everything sound noble. Protect. I leaned back in my chair. "Do you know the difference between protection and permission?" I asked. Lisa didn't answer. "Protection is when someone asks how they can help," I continued. "Permission is when someone decides for you," Neil sighed. "This is getting philosophical." "No," I said. "It's getting honest." I reached for the timeline sheet and tapped the first date. February 15th. Lisa looked at it reluctantly. "That was the phone call where you described me as struggling." "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" She hesitated. "I was worried enough to move my pension into your account. It wasn't for me, but it was through you." The room held that quiet tension again. Not loud, just undeniable. I looked at Donna. "You signed as witness." Donna nodded slowly. "Yes. Did anyone tell you I hadn't been part of the conversation?" Donna swallowed. "No." Lisa looked at her sharply. "I assumed Mom knew." "You assumed wrong," I said. That sentence settled over the table like dust. For the first time that evening, Lisa looked tired. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. "You're making me sound like a villain," she said quietly. "I'm describing what happened." Her voice softened. "I was trying to make things easier for who?" She didn't answer. The clock ticked again. Ava finally spoke. "Grandma never forgets to pay the electric bill." Lisa rubbed her forehead. "That's not the point, Ava." "What is the point?" Ava asked. Lisa opened her mouth, closed it again. For a moment she had no answer, and in that small silence the power in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that everyone could feel it, because the story Lisa had built, the careful narrative of a worried daughter organizing her mother's life, no longer fit the facts sitting on the table. The dates, the meetings, the transfer, the unsigned line. I reached forward and gently pushed the folder back to the center of the table, right between Lisa and me. "Lisa," I said calmly, "you can meet advisors, you can ask questions, you can even worry about me." She looked up. "But you cannot manage my life without me in the room." No one argued with that. For a long moment, the entire family sat there in silence. Then Lisa slowly closed the folder, not triumphantly, not angrily, just carefully, like someone realizing that the plan they had built did not belong to them after all. Outside, a car drove past the house again. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me, and for the first time since she had come back from the beach, my daughter looked around the kitchen the way people do when they realize something important. This room was still mine, and nothing about it had changed. The strange thing about power is that it rarely returns with a loud sound. It comes back quietly, like a chair sliding into its proper place. That night, after everyone had gone home, the kitchen was finally still again. The dishes were washed. The gravy pot sat upside down in the drying rack. The folder was no longer on the table. Lisa had taken it upstairs with her, not triumphantly, not angrily, just thoughtfully. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment by the window above the sink. The porch light outside made the garden glow faintly. The roses were still bare branches this time of year, but the buds would come soon. They always did. Some things still kept their promises. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The house had that quiet feeling it gets before the day begins, before the coffee maker clicks on, before the first cabinet opens. I made coffee and sat down at the table, my chair, the 1-3 seats down from where Lisa had sat earlier that week. I pulled it closer to the center, not dramatically, just enough. Sometimes the smallest movements tell the truest story. A few minutes later, Lisa came downstairs. She looked tired. Her hair was still tied back from sleep, and she had wrapped my old blue sweater around her shoulders, the one she always borrowed when she stayed here. For a moment, she just stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Then she walked over and sat across from me, not in my husband's chair, across from me. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning." She looked down at the table. The folder was there again, but it was closed. She rested her hands on top of it. "I didn't sleep much," she said. "I didn't expect you would." She nodded once. I read everything again. "And?" Lisa exhaled slowly. "I see how it looked." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She wrapped both hands around it. "You were right about one thing," she said after a moment. "What's that?" "I started planning before I talked to you. Yes. I thought if everything was already organized, it would be easier." "For who?" "For everyone," she said automatically. Then she shook her head. "No. For me, that honesty mattered more than any apology could. I was scared," she continued quietly. "Of what?" "That you'd struggle someday and I wouldn't know what to do. That's a reasonable fear, but I handled it the wrong way." I nodded. "You skipped the part where we talk." Lisa looked at the folder again. "I thought if the paperwork was already done, you'd see the logic." "That's the problem with logic," I said gently. "It forgets people." The kitchen stayed quiet for a moment. Then Lisa pushed the folder toward me. "I'm not going to use it," she said. I opened it. The same 2 pages were inside, but the signature line at the bottom had something new written across it, in blue ink. "Void." I looked up. Lisa shrugged slightly. "I called the lawyer this morning. You woke up early." "Yeah." We sat there together for a while, not fixing everything, not pretending nothing had happened, just sitting in the kitchen where the conversation should have started weeks ago. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "What happens now?" I folded the papers back into the folder and set it aside. "Now," I said, "we do what families are supposed to do." "And what's that?" "We talk before we plan." Lisa nodded slowly. "I can do that. And we make decisions together." She looked around the kitchen, at the table, at the stove, at the refrigerator humming softly behind us. "I guess this house isn't changing any time soon." I smiled faintly. "This house will change someday," her eyebrows lifted. "But not because someone decided it for me." Lisa leaned back in her chair, across the table, not at the head of it, and for the first time in days the kitchen felt like my kitchen again. Not because I had won an argument, not because paperwork had been stopped, but because the story about my life had returned to the one place it always belonged, with me. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. Lisa watched me carefully. "Mom? Yes? If things ever do get hard, we'll talk." She nodded. That was enough. Outside, the morning light was starting to fill the yard. Inside, the kitchen felt solid again. just like my husband had promised all those years ago. And I looked at my daughter and said the one thing I knew she would remember. Tomorrow doesn't arrive without me in the room. Lisa didn't answer. She just nodded. And that was enough. Sometimes the most important changes in a family don't happen with lawyers or paperwork. They happen with one quiet decision: to speak before someone else decides the story for you. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever sat in a room where decisions about your life were already made, tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from today? I read every message. And if this story meant something to you, even a small reminder to speak up for your own life, take a moment to like the video. It quietly helps this channel reach people who may need to hear stories like this. And if you enjoy thoughtful life stories like this one, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. There are many more stories here about dignity, boundaries, and the quiet moments when a woman decides her life will not be rewritten. And if someone in your life needs this reminder today, share this story with them. On your screen now are 2 more stories I think you'll connect with. Take a moment to choose one. I'll see you there. The strange thing about power is that it rarely returns with a loud sound. It comes back quietly, like a chair sliding into its proper place. That night, after everyone had gone home, the kitchen was finally still again. The dishes were washed, the gravy pot set upside down in the drying rack. The folder was no longer on the table. Lisa had taken it upstairs with her, not triumphantly, not angrily, just thoughtfully. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment by the window above the sink. The porch light outside made the garden glow faintly. The roses were still bare branches this time of year, but the buds would come soon. They always did. Some things still kept their promises. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The house had that quiet feeling it gets before the day begins, before the coffee maker clicks on, before the first cabinet opens. I made coffee and sat down at the table, my chair, the 1-3 seats down from where Lisa had sat earlier that week. I pulled it closer to the center, not dramatically, just enough. Sometimes the smallest movements tell the truest story. A few minutes later, Lisa came downstairs. She looked tired. Her hair was still tied back from sleep, and she had wrapped my old blue sweater around her shoulders, the one she always borrowed when she stayed here. For a moment, she just stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Then she walked over and sat across from me, not in my husband's chair, across from me. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning." She looked down at the table. The folder was there again, but it was closed. She rested her hands on top of it. "I didn't sleep much," she said. "I didn't expect you would." She nodded once. I read everything again. "And?" Lisa exhaled slowly. "I see how it looked." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She wrapped both hands around it. "You were right about one thing," she said after a moment. "What's that?" "I started planning before I talked to you." "Yes. I thought if everything was already organized, it would be easier." "For who?" "For everyone," she said automatically. Then she shook her head. "No. For me, that honesty mattered more than any apology could. I was scared," she continued quietly. "Of what?" "That you'd struggle someday and I wouldn't know what to do. That's a reasonable fear, but I handled it the wrong way." I nodded. "You skipped the part where we talk." Lisa looked at the folder again. "I thought if the paperwork was already done, you'd see the logic." "That's the problem with logic," I said gently. "It forgets people." The kitchen stayed quiet for a moment. Then Lisa pushed the folder toward me. "I'm not going to use it," she said. I opened it. The same 2 pages were inside, but the signature line at the bottom had something new written across it, in blue ink. Void. I looked up. Lisa shrugged slightly. I called the lawyer this morning. You woke up early, yeah. We sat there together for a while, not fixing everything, not pretending nothing had happened, just sitting in the kitchen where the conversation should have started weeks ago. Finally, Lisa spoke again. What happens now? I folded the papers back into the folder and set it aside. Now, I said, we do what families are supposed to do. And what's that? We talk before we plan. Lisa nodded slowly. I can do that. And we make decisions together. She looked around the kitchen, at the table, at the stove, at the refrigerator humming softly behind us. I guess this house isn't changing any time soon. I smiled faintly. This house will change someday, her eyebrows lifted. But not because someone decided it for me. Lisa leaned back in her chair, across the table, not at the head of it, and for the first time in days the kitchen felt like my kitchen again. Not because I had won an argument, not because paperwork had been stopped, but because the story about my life had returned to the one place it always belonged, with me. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. Lisa watched me carefully. Mom? Yes? If things ever do get hard, we'll talk. She nodded. That was enough. Outside, the morning light was starting to fill the yard. Inside, the kitchen felt solid again, just like my husband had promised all those years ago. And I looked at my daughter and said the one thing I knew she would remember. Tomorrow doesn't arrive without me in the room. Lisa didn't answer. She just nodded. And that was enough. Sometimes the most important changes in a family don't happen with lawyers or paperwork. They happen with one quiet decision: to speak before someone else decides the story for you. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever sat in a room where decisions about your life were already made, tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from today? I read every message. And if this story meant something to you, even a small reminder to speak up for your own life, take a moment to like the video. It quietly helps this channel reach people who may need to hear stories like this. And if you enjoy thoughtful life stories like this one, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. There are many more stories here about dignity, boundaries, and the quiet moments when a woman decides her life will not be rewritten. And if someone in your life needs this reminder today, share this story with them. On your screen now are 2 more stories I think you'll connect with. Take a moment to choose one. I'll see you there.